Do you find yourself awake at 3 a.m., struggling to settle your mind and sleep? Are you thinking of resorting to sleeping pills? Listen in as Morgan Adams, a double certified holistic sleep coach, shares strategies to reclaim your rest and discover the land of bountiful sleep, crucial to your good health and a clear mind. This is the Silver Divorce Podcast, broadcast from the Whitfield Media Group studios in Chattanooga, Tennessee, brought to you by our title sponsor, the Center for Sports Medicine and Orthopedics, and show sponsor, Medicare Misty. Center for Sports Medicine and Orthopedics is the area's leading provider of multi-specialty orthopedic care. Using innovative surgical techniques and technologies, their team of specialists deliver exceptional results backed by exceptional patient care. Learn more at sportmed.com. Medicare Misty is a real person who can help answer your Medicare questions. Get real help from her team at medicaremisty.com. I'm your host, Lisa McCluskey, and before we start, please subscribe and share your comments. Those are very important to me. I welcome your questions at silverdivorcepodcast@gmail.com, and please join our Facebook and Instagram pages at Silver Divorce Podcast. And now, let's podcast. Well, today I am pleased to be joined by Morgan Adams, MSW, a holistic sleep coach. She has her own story of going from relying on prescription meds, prescription sleeping pills for years, to searching for a more holistic approach. And then she became a holistic sleep coach to help other women through the journey she went through. She has been focused on the unique needs of women, and she's here today to help us. Welcome, Morgan.
Thank you, Lisa. It's nice to be here.
Great. I'm happy to have you. I know you're in Richmond, and Richmond is one of my absolute favorite towns. I actually went to the university in Richmond and was invited to speak to their marketing class once when Will Flynn was an adjunct professor. So I just love that town.
Yeah, it's U of R is a gorgeous campus.
Yeah,
so pretty. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So your background, though, you have an incredible story to share, one of interpersonal strength. And I would love for our listeners to hear about your journey as a 2-time cancer survivor and how you built your expertise on holistic sleep. Would you share that with us?
Sure. Well, my sleep story really began about 20 years ago when I was in my mid-30s. I was having a little bit of a relationship challenge and a romantic relationship, and it created a situation where I had what they call sleep onset insomnia. Basically, that's sort of a fancy way of saying I had a hard time falling asleep. And I would lie in bed most nights, 1 to 2 hours, waiting for sleep to come. And after a couple of months of this, I got really tired of it, and I went to my primary care doctor, who prescribed Ambien, a very commonly used sleeping medication. And at that time in my life, I was a pharmaceutical sales rep. So being prescribed a medication was just, par for the course. It was like no big deal at all for me to accept a medication. And I took the medication to sleep. It helped me get to sleep a little bit faster, but I had a lot of residual side effects the next day, grogginess, brain fog. And I continued on this trajectory with the pills because I was really, really scared I was not going to be able to sleep without them. And then about 8 years into that, I met a guy who I started dating, and early in our relationship, he said, Morgan, when you take these sleeping pills, you kind of act like a zombie, and it freaks me out. And I thought, oh my gosh, he's right. These pills are not serving me. Well, I ended up marrying that guy later, but so I
think I know him.
You know him, and I'm so grateful that he spoke, from his heart, and I ended up doing what I recommend others not do if they're taking a sleep med or any med for that matter, is just taking themselves off of it without any kind of guidance from their prescribing provider. But I did not know any better, and I did take myself off the pill. And fortunately, I was lucky enough to not have side effects or unintended things happen to me. And I got off the pills and I slept quite well for many years. And then there was a plot twist, and that plot twist was March of 2020, right when the pandemic first started, and nobody knew what was going on. I found that my sleep was starting to take a nosedive, and I was very concerned because I did not want to go back to the world of insomnia. So I got myself an Oura ring to track my sleep. I started Googling, how to sleep better. And in pretty short order, I was able to get my sleep back on track. And during this time, I started posting on Facebook just organically. I didn't have a business at this time. I started just sharing things that I was doing to get my sleep better. And I came to find out that a lot of other women in my social circle were struggling with their sleep too, and found my tips actually really helpful. And so it was late in 2020 that I had this revelation. And I still remember where I was when I told my husband I wanted to do this. I said, I want to be a sleep coach for women. And he was like, that's amazing. Like, that's totally what you should do. Now, the reason I chose this is because, some of the success I had getting my own sleep on track. But prior to that, you mentioned in the intro, having had breast cancer. That was in 2018, so 2 years before this was happening. That particular diagnosis was a pivotal moment for me personally in terms of figuring out what my life's purpose was, what my mission would be. And during that breast cancer experience, I knew that I wanted to help other women with their health, but I just did not understand how that would actually play out. And once I found this new fascination with sleep, it all kind of came together. And I became a sleep coach in 2021. Of course, I took a year to get my certifications and to study and learn. And I've been doing the sleep coaching for that long, for over 3 years now.
That's fantastic how the two things came together to put you on a new path. That's remarkable. Well, let's talk about the issues of restorative sleep for those going through divorce. And I did read an article in the National Institutes of Health about the impact of divorce on sleep. And I experienced that myself, where sleep, it's a very vulnerable psychological state. And if we're not feeling secure and safe in our external environment, our social environment, it does have severe consequences to being able to achieve that restorative sleep. And in my divorce, I experienced that. And as you mentioned, I went to my physician and was subscribed a light sleep aid. But, anybody who's gone through that divorce stress knows that if you're not sleeping well, you're not thinking rationally, and you're going to be thinking more emotionally. And that's a time when you need the restorative rest most, is when you're going through divorce. There's so much going on and so many decisions you have to be making. So, Morgan, would you share with our listeners why sleep is so important? What are the effects on your body if you're not getting that sleep? I think so many people will pass it off of, I just can't sleep, there's too much stress, and they think it's something that they have to suffer with.
Right. Yeah. Well, sleep is one of those things that affects literally every part of your life. So if you Google something like what is important to you and Google and sleep, add sleep to that, you'll find that sleep literally impacts every part of your life. And so just, kind of generally speaking, what we really need sleep for is repair of our body and brain. So you think about the fact that we have something called a lymphatic system in our brain. It's very similar to the lymphatic system in our body, but it's specifically in our brain. And this was, a fairly recent discovery. And essentially what happens, we get an overnight brainwashing. The cerebral spinal fluid from our brain is sort of getting wrung out, and we're able to cleanse out some of those toxins while we're in deep sleep. So that's a really critical function of sleep. We also know that sleep helps us with our learning and memory, our hormone balance, our memory consolidation, and emotional regulation. Like what you mentioned, we actually need that sleep to think rationally and make rational decisions. We need sleep to have empathy for other people. They did a study that showed that people who were sleep deprived actually were less apt to donate to a nonprofit and less apt to help a stranger who asked for help. And what we typically are seeing in the literature is that when we look at studies that have been done for many years, and we see that there's a correlation between people having some chronic diseases show up when they are not sleeping for a long time. So the general rule of thumb tends to be like less than 6 hours is when we start seeing the chronic disease rates, diabetes, heart disease, metabolic dysfunction, obesity. We tend to see those go up when people are getting less than 6 hours. But I do want to share, though, that these can be scary headlines. Like these headlines often will very much rattle the folks who I work with who basically have insomnia. So we can't really prove causation really for this, but we can see correlation, which is, I think, more important to note, to take note of than this causes this, because we'll never have a study that's able to assess the effects of sleep deprivation from that long-term standpoint.
It does make you, though, step back and think, maybe I do need to take this a little more seriously. It isn't something that I will complain about and think that I have to suffer through, because there's so many other things that could be impacted by it. I had no idea. I know in my career as a working professional, I routinely only slept about 5 hours a night, and because you have so much stress, and it never occurred to me that could have been contributing to so many other issues in my body.
Yeah.
It's somewhat scary. So, like you said, it is somewhat scary and may prompt us to take it more seriously.
Right.
So what about, I mentioned that as a working professional, I typically only slept about 5 hours a night. And you always hear you should get 8 hours. Is that an absolute, or what are the guidelines on what should we be looking at for sleep?
Yeah, well, I call it sort of the myth of 8 hours of sleep. It's really not what we're aiming for necessarily. It depends on who we are. So the guidelines from the National Sleep Foundation say that for adults 18 to 64, 7 to 9 hours of sleep is recommended. But when you look in the fine print of the guidelines, you'll notice that it says between 6 and 10 hours could be appropriate.
Okay.
So what I like to tell people, and I think the reason why you hear this 8 hours of sleep all the time is because 8 is in between 7 and 9.
Oh.
So they just took the average, right?
It's the average.
And so the way I like to explain it to people is we all have, our own shoe size. We all have our own calorie need. And so we may have different sleep needs from our friends or other people in our lives. So quite often I'll run into situations where someone will say, well, my friend always sleeps 8 hours, and I should too. And the reality is like that person may need 8 hours, but you may need 7 hours, and you might be just fine. So we all really need to kind of think about our own personal sleep need. But it actually goes beyond the hours. So we get hung up a lot on the hours, but we really need to think about the consistency of that sleep. And there was a study done just less than a year ago showing that consistency and regularity were actually more important than the number of hours from a mortality standpoint. So they looked at people longitudinally for several years, and they found that those who slept 6 hours a night on a regular, consistent basis had a lower mortality rate than folks who were sleeping 8 hours a night, who were sleeping irregular hours, or who were waking up a lot during the night. So I think that moving forward, what we're going to start seeing in the public health recommendations for sleep is a greater focus on the consistency piece, so that we're not super focused on the amount of hours we're logging.
Well, that's great to hear, because I will stress out. I'll wake up and think, well, I've only been asleep 5 hours. I need to force myself to sleep a couple more hours. And you end up being more stressed about how much sleep you had and you're really not resting. So,
Exactly.
yeah, that's good to hear. Well, it seems as though I was always awake at 3 a.m. and I still do that. This morning I was awake at, it was 4:30 a.m., but normally I have been waking up at 3. So, I hear that's common. Why is that? And what can I do about it?
Yeah, what you just mentioned is actually the most common complaint from my clients or anyone out there who's concerned about their sleep. So I actually wrote a free guide about 3 a.m. wake ups. It's a free guide you can get on my website. It's called Awake Again at 3 a.m., your guide to why you're waking up and what to do about it. But let's delve into some of the highlights from that guide.
Yeah.
And I'll just share that it is actually very normal to have awakenings during the night. We have this myth that we need to sleep solidly through the whole night without waking up, and it's just not realistic. And the reason why is because after we complete a sleep cycle, and we have about 5 to 7 a night, there is a natural tendency to have a brief awakening after each sleep cycle. And it's usually like less than 2 minutes. So if you're awake less than 2 minutes, you're likely not going to know that you're awake. But this brief awakening is really designed from our evolution. So think back to many, many years ago when we did not have comfortable homes with security systems and locks on our doors. We were in the wild, right? Mm-hmm. And so we would naturally just scan our surrounding for safety. And so that behavior has followed us into the modern day world. So when people hear about that, they're like, okay, this is not so scary to wake up. The problem is when you are lying there and you can't get back to sleep. So let me kind of share the mindset part of what's happening in our brain when we wake up at night is that we're operating a bit from our amygdala. And so we're operating from that irrational part of our brain. And you may have noticed, Lisa, I've noticed this with myself, is that the thoughts that you have at 3 a.m. are not the same kinds of thoughts you have at like 9 in the morning.
Right.
They're usually more catastrophic. I mean,
Right.
I've quite often, had these crazy thoughts at 3 a.m. and I wake up the next day. I'm like, I can't even believe I was worried about that. Like, what's wrong with me?
Oh, I know.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So we want to know, we want to really just be aware that our thoughts are irrational and acknowledge that. And to kind of make a contract with ourselves that we're not going to make any rash decisions while we're up at that hour, right? Let's all promise each other not to do that.
Yeah, and I have to say, sometimes I'll wake up thinking I heard a noise, a loud sound, and I'll think, am I getting a signal something's happened to one of my kids and I just don't know it? You start thinking these crazy thoughts at 3 a.m. that have no basis in fact whatsoever. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think just having that knowledge, we can kind of try to talk ourselves off the ledge a bit if we can. I know it can be really difficult, but let me just kind of go over a few reasons why we might be waking up other than what I just addressed about the awakenings that are sort of for our safety scan. So the three that I see most often, and there are many, and I list them out in my guide, but number one would be potentially blood sugar dysregulation. So quite often what we'll see is somebody has a blood sugar dip or a crash in the middle of the night, and that triggers this cortisol or adrenaline response, which awakens them. And so what people can do if they suspect that might be the case is they could potentially have a very light snack before bed, like an hour before bed, maybe have some Greek yogurt with some nuts on it or a banana with some nut butter. To see if it's the blood sugar dip that's actually causing the wake up. So you can kind of test for yourself at home that way. The second thing that I also often see is that people are hot. And I'm not necessarily talking about like having night sweats or hot flashes, but they're just overheated. And so there's things that you can do to make your environment cooler, and we can delve into that later. But then the third reason that I see a lot, and this is, quite scary in a way, is that people are having sleep breathing issues. So quite often I'll be working with somebody who comes to me with insomnia, and they literally have no idea that they have a sleep breathing issue. And during the course of our working together, when they're not responding to some of the techniques and interventions and they're continually having these wake ups, I really do urge them to get their sleep breathing tested, because when you're not breathing, your body is sending a signal to your brain, there's danger, and it will just wake you up. So having all these mini arousals throughout the night, I heard something on social media recently, and it really got my attention. They said that, sleep apnea is like having multiple heart attacks throughout the night.
Oh, gosh.
So, I mean, and people kind of laugh it off like, oh, snoring is no big deal, but snoring can be indicative of sleep apnea. So if you suspect you have a sleep breathing issue, definitely have that looked at. Go get a sleep study. There are sleep studies now that you can just order and have them sent to your house, so you don't have to actually go to a lab if you don't want to.
That's important because this audience is divorced people, and many of them are living alone now, so they don't have a partner to say, hey,
Yes.
you're snoring a lot at night.
Yes.
And getting that sleep study could actually save their life. As you said, it's like having many heart attacks throughout the night.
Yeah. And what we do know for women in midlife is that their rate of sleep apnea or sleep breathing issues will increase dramatically. It will actually increase to match their male counterparts at that age, because we know that the female hormones actually are protective of our airways. So when those hormones start to go, it can impact our airways. Also, sometimes in midlife, women tend to gain a little bit of weight, and then that extra weight can affect their sleep breathing. So the latest statistic is that 90% of women who have sleep apnea go undiagnosed. So it's very, very possible that there are people out there with sleep apnea. I don't mean to scare anybody, but I think that oftentimes a woman who is thin, 40, 50 and above, will come into the doctor. I've seen this happen before. Come into the doctor's office, and they are completely not even screened, or the discussion is not even had about sleep apnea, because they don't fit the stereotypical, overweight man with a pot belly, right?
Right, yes.
So there's several women out there that I've worked with who are, lean, athletic women in midlife, but they do have a sleep breathing issue.
So going back to the menopause issue, there are women who are entering perimenopause earlier than ever, and even in their 30s, where before you might enter it in your 40s and then go into menopause. So can you talk about that hormonal impact a little bit more on sleep? How do we recognize that it's maybe a hormonal impact and not necessarily some of the issues related to stress?
Yeah, this can be a tricky one to sort out, but basically what's happening when we're getting into our late 30s, into our 40s, is our female hormones, the primary ones being estrogen and progesterone, will start to decline. And in some people, that can translate into interrupted sleep. It can also translate into hot flashes and night sweats. And so quite often what people will do is, if they're having those symptoms, they will go and talk to their doctor about hormone replacement therapy, where the short form of that is called HRT. Mm-hmm. And HRT can be pretty effective for the hot flashes and night sweats. Now, as far as for the waking up, they're kind of mixed results. It doesn't work for everybody, but it's something to have a conversation with your doctor about if you're having a lot of sleep struggles and you're a woman in midlife.
So if you are perhaps doing some HRT therapy and you're still struggling with sleep, it might be something where you would need to have some additional coaching, or even have your sleep breathing tested. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair to say. And they've also done a study where they showed that CBTI, which is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, can be just as impactful as HRT for sleep issues with midlife women. Mm-hmm. And CBT is something that I use in my practice, and it doesn't involve any drugs. It's really working on your attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors around sleep, and there's no side effects to it.
Okay. Yeah, because I know if you've been through breast cancer, you aren't easily able to go on some of the hormone replacement therapy.
Well, there's a little bit of a debate around that in the medical field. Yeah. So for myself right now, I actually am on HRT, but I'm 3 years post breast cancer. So they did a huge study called the WHI study back in the early 2000s. They got everyone very, very concerned about hormones in midlife and with the breast cancer scare, and a lot of people got taken off
Yeah.
HRT at that time. But then recently they pretty much debunked the study. And for anyone who's like thinking about HRT and they have a family history of breast cancer or a personal history of breast cancer, there's a book called Estrogen Matters, which really goes deep into the studies. And so what a lot of providers are feeling a lot more comfortable prescribing HRT to their clients who've had breast cancer or had it in their family.
I'm glad you said that because I had breast cancer 20 years ago and I was still following those old schools of thought and had no idea that that had changed.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have to look into that. Okay, so then let's talk about some strategies. You did mention some cooling pads. What are some of the other, are there things of a physical nature that can help you with your getting to sleep?
Yeah, so we really want to think about our sleeping environment as being like a cave, right? So we want to look at it as like a sleep sanctuary. We want to have it cool, dark, and quiet. So on the cool front, you want to think about having your sleeping space a few degrees cooler than the rest of your home. So, and it varies from person to person, but generally speaking, a temperature around like 65 to 68 seems to be a good sleeping temperature for a lot of people because our bodies actually our core temperatures need to cool down a couple of degrees to initiate sleep and to stay asleep. And then there's bedding, which, can be like bamboo sheets, I think, tend to be cooling for a lot of people, as well as bamboo fibers for nightgowns and pajamas. And then sort of the next level of intervention that I recommend to people who have tried those things and they're still too warm are the cooling mattress pads. And I use one of these myself have for like 2 years, and it's an absolute game changer because you have the ability to like really, really control the heat, the cooling to your liking, and kind of make it so that you're cool or warm at different parts of the night. So you might want to go to sleep warm and then wake up warm and have it cool in the middle. So you can completely customize the temperature.
Okay.
It's really nice.
So what about weighted blankets? We heard about that for a while. They were supposed to help with sleep.
Yeah, weighted blankets do have some data about sleep quality. They tend to be better for people who may have a little bit of anxiety. So there's this theory that the weight of the blanket can kind of relieve the anxiety. But what I've noticed is that there's sort of either a love or hate relationship with weighted blankets. Mm-hmm. You either really love them or you really find them offensive. So
I can see that.
There's no there doesn't seem to be a kind of like a middle ground with weighted blankets. But I think that they can be a good thing to try. However, you do want to make sure that if you're a hot sleeper, you're getting one that is more on the cooling side, because I've experimented with different ones over the years, and some of them are just too heavy and make me overheat.
I can see that. I tried one, and halfway through the night, I'm like, "Get off of me!"
Yeah.
Way too much weight.
Yeah.
So then let's talk about warm baths and showers. Do those really help, or should you be thinking about more cooling down your body?
Well, the warm baths and showers actually do have some evidence as far as helping us cool our bodies off before sleep. There's sort of this counterintuitive cooling effect that warming our bodies has before sleep. So what you want to aim for is spending, at least 10 minutes in the warm water. Okay. Is really sort of the recommended amount. And you don't want it like too hot, but you want it warm for sure. And you want to try to aim for like an hour and a half or so before bed. You don't want to do it literally right before bed. You want to have a little bit of distance between the shower and bath and your bedtime.
Okay, that makes sense.
Got an injury that just can't wait? There's no need to delay your care. Center for Sports Medicine and Orthopedics is excited to announce that our Urgent Ortho Walk-In Clinic is now available on Saturdays at the Gun Barrel Road location. Open from 8 to noon, we're here to treat sprains, strains, fractures, and more. No appointment needed. So skip the long ER wait and get specialized orthopedic care fast. Visit us this Saturday at Center for Sports Medicine and Orthopedics Urgent Ortho. We're the center for expert care right when you need it. Learn more at sportmed.com.
One of the things that I read was about the circadian rhythm, that each person has their own rhythm and it does impact their sleep and can disrupt their sleep. So, what is that all about, and how do we
Yeah.
pay attention to our circadian rhythm?
So circadian rhythm is basically a way of saying that our bodies are working on a 24-hour cycle, and the cycle is really depending on our light and dark exposure. And when we talk about circadian rhythm and sleep, you really actually need to get your circadian rhythm in line first, and sleep is a byproduct of that really strong circadian rhythm. And so when I'm working with folks, one of the things we work on is really creating that strong circadian rhythm. And there are a few things that I'll suggest to kind of get that on point. First thing I would say is have that consistent wake up time every day. Our bodies really rely on that consistency. And I shared earlier about the study, noting that the consistency was really key. And the other thing that you can do is have morning sunlight every morning. So generally speaking, you want to try to get outside and get 10 to 15 minutes of natural light exposure as soon as you can. I mean, as soon as the sun is up, you would want to aim to be out there, but you do have like a little bit of wiggle room. And so what you want to focus on is like not having sunglasses or contacts or glasses on while you're out there. And the reason is because when the natural light hits your retina, it sends a signal to your suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is your circadian pacemaker. And from there, there's this really wonderful cascade of neurohormones and neurotransmitters and hormones that happens. And so basically, you're setting your melatonin up for the next night. You're getting a natural cortisol boost as well. So those are a couple of things that you can do, in addition to also really establishing a really consistent routine for yourself overall. And so the routine would hopefully be having meals on a consistent basis, like having your breakfast, lunch, and dinner within like an hour of each other to keep consistent, because all of our cells in our body have their own little circadian clock that is synced up to our master clock. So, our stomachs, you can kind of sort of train your stomach to expect to excrete the digestive enzymes on a regular basis. So everything just moves a lot more smoothly when your body is doing the same things day in and day out around the same time each day.
Yeah, so Morgan, what I hear you say is getting out for that morning walk isn't just good for your health in terms of your cardiac health, but it could be good for your circadian rhythm.
Yes.
Yeah.
And every single client that I share that with, and they adapt that practice, they do see like benefits with their sleep and their mood. And one extra thing you can add on top of that is having a buddy to do that with, because then you're getting your movement, you're getting your light, and then you're getting your socialization. So recruit your friend, but just leave your sunglasses at home.
That's great. So what about if I work nights? How do you manage to regulate your circadian rhythm if you're a night shifter?
Yeah, that's a really tricky one. I wouldn't, honestly recommend shift work for a long period of time for people. So shift work really, a lot of people would agree with this, is that it really should be designated for people who are younger for a specific amount of time. Because what we find is that quite often women, especially who are doing shift work for many, many years, tend to be more predisposed to breast cancer because their melatonin secretion is affected because of the nighttime light. So they're completely out of sync with their natural rhythms. And melatonin, when you produce that, it's also an antioxidant. It's not just a sleep hormone, but it's a powerful antioxidant. And so that's one of the theories as to why some women who do night shift for 20, 30 years, well into their 50s, tend to be more apt to get breast cancer. So I'm not a fan of shift work, but I do realize that our world depends on, people working overnights, EMTs and doctors. So if you can, if you're out there and you're doing shift work, see if you could potentially transition to a new time, a daytime shift, so that you can, reduce your risk of getting your circadian rhythm misaligned for that long.
Wow, that's really important information. And then I would ask, how do I make that transition? I would think if you go from many years of night shift to trying to work a day shift, it might be a little rocky. And what could you expect in a transition like that?
Yeah, I think that probably it would. Now, I haven't had any clients who've done this, but I would imagine that people would kind of bounce back pretty quickly
Yeah.
because we're naturally wired to be awake and active during the daylight hours, and we're naturally wired to be asleep during nighttime hours. So
Okay.
I think that probably people would see an increase in energy and mood. If they have any health issues, they might find some of the health issues going away because
Yeah.
they're naturally going to, I would assume, become more healthy because their circadian rhythm is in sync with the natural rhythms.
Now that makes a lot of sense. They might actually start sleeping a little bit better. They're on more of a cycle that's natural to their body.
Yes.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay, so let's talk about napping then. I know for me, when I'm having those nights where I'm not sleeping, I find myself in the afternoon, about 3 in the afternoon. It seems to be 3 a.m. and 3 p.m. Um,
Yeah.
I'll want to nap. Is that good? Is that bad? Should I try to hold off and wait till night, or what's the strategy around that?
Well, it kind of depends, but generally speaking, we really try to discourage people from having naps after 3. So you're at 3, you're probably safe, and keeping the naps to like 20 to 30 minutes. The issue with naps that are longer and later in the day is that you can look at naps as essentially snacking on sleep. So if you're snacking before dinner, you may not be hungry for your dinner, right? So if you're snacking on sleep, you may not actually be adequately sleepy at the time that you're normally going to bed. So any naps that you can take earlier in the day is probably going to do well for your sleep the following night. But naps as a whole can be a really great restorative practice if you want sort of an energy boost, a cognitive boost, and just want a little bit of a kind of something to prop you up during the day. So I think it's totally fine.
So a little sleep snack is okay. A little,
Yeah.
just try to keep it before 3 p.m.
Yes, if
Okay.
possible. Yes.
All right. And I have a lot of questions because I have some from the time I started menopause and going through the divorce and all of the work, it seems like sleep has eluded me for years. So I know there are a lot of people out there like me. Some of the things that I've tried also to help, melatonin tea, I've tried that. What is your experience with that? And are there any supplements that would help as well?
Well, the melatonin has sort of like, I would say it's a very controversial topic in the world of sleep. There are people who are really opposed to it, and there are people who are really like for it. I tend to be a little bit more pro melatonin personally.
Okay, good.
And I do believe that there is a good use case for melatonin in your 50s and beyond, because we know that our natural melatonin production decreases as we get older into our 50s and beyond. And in fact, somebody, I forget who it was, coined this phrase, melatonopause.
Oh, that's
And
great.
I thought, well, that's so accurate.
It is.
So I think that there's a use case for a very small dose of melatonin for people 50 plus. And when I talk about microdose, I'm talking about like 0.3, 0.5, 1 milligram. The problem with a lot of melatonin, though, is that the quality of melatonin supplements is not always standard, and it's not always good. And what I see often is that they're selling melatonin in larger amounts, like 5, 10 milligrams, which is really actually too much for supplementing, really. I mean, there's use cases for, like when I had breast cancer, I was given a high dose of melatonin as an antioxidant. So there is a place for that, but for actually supplementing our melatonin for sleep, we don't need 10 milligrams. We just don't need that much. And there have been some studies that have shown that when you pull melatonin from drugstores, they did a study in Canada doing this, they showed that the melatonin that was advertised actually didn't match up to what was in the actual pill.
Oh.
So there was either like too much or too little. And if you have too much melatonin, what can happen is you may be groggy because it's just too high of a dose. So I'm a big fan of something called herbatonin. It's a plant melatonin. And they actually did studies against synthetic melatonin, and they found that it had like 5 to 10 more antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties than synthetic melatonin without having some of the additives that the synthetic melatonin has.
Okay. So I would love to link that in the show notes.
Sure.
And so that people can find it. And I also will link your guide in the show notes as well.
Excellent.
Yeah. I did want to ask, I hear your little puppy in the background there.
Yes, I know.
I have,
Oh, goodness.
I have 2 dogs at home, and you just never know when they're going to go wild.
I know.
And usually there's nothing out there, no reason,
know.
but something
Yeah.
triggers them.
Yeah, this one is very sensitive to noise.
Yes,
and so
yeah,
he probably
yeah.
just heard whatever. And
Right, exactly. Yeah. I did want to ask you about vitamin D. Does that, because so many people now, or women, I should say, my doctor told me, are vitamin D deficient. Does that affect your ability to sleep as well?
Yeah, great question. Well, they have done some studies showing that vitamin D deficiency can impact our sleep quality. So when I'm working with clients, I'm really urging them to get their vitamin D levels checked to make sure they're not deficient in that, because it can potentially impact your sleep quality.
Yeah, I actually, because I have a thyroid condition, I'm not able to really process vitamin D, and my doctor prescribed a prescription vitamin D, and I could tell a great difference in how I felt after just a couple of weeks of taking that. So I wondered about that as well. So let's talk about the common thing people turn to when they can't sleep, and that's alcohol. And is that something that helps you, hurts you? I know I can say for me, if I have red wine, I tried red wine to sleep better, and I was just, I felt horrible the next day.
Yeah, well, the actual alcohol is the world's most popular sleep aid.
Yeah.
Believe it or not. And it can help us fall asleep more quickly. I mean, we have seen that, but the problem is that it impacts our sleep quality. And what you may find is that it's sort of cutting off your REM sleep cycle during the first part of the night, and then you're having this REM rebound effect later in the night. Early in the morning, you may experience more awakenings. You may have to use the bathroom. And generally speaking, the quality of your sleep is just not as good. And they did a study back in 2018 where they looked at sleep quality loss matched up against how much alcohol you had. And so just one glass of alcohol for women reduced sleep quality by something like 24%. And so the more alcohol you have, the lower your sleep quality gets.
Okay, so avoid that.
Yeah, I mean, so for people who do want to still have alcohol, what I would suggest is having alcohol earlier in the night. So thinking happy hour versus nightcap.
Okay.
So 5 o'clock, have a glass of wine instead of having it at dinner, and then really keeping it to a minimum. So maybe stopping at 1 to 2 drinks versus having more than that, because it really, really can impact. I've seen it, and I do experiments on myself all the time. And I recently got a Whoop band for tracking my sleep. I have actually 3 sleep trackers that I use.
Oh.
I don't recommend getting 3, but I'm kind of weird that way. This is my job, right?
Right.
But Whoop gave me a notice the other day, and it said alcohol takes away or decreases your recovery by 6%. And, I'm drinking maybe 1 glass of wine a week, right? And it said compared to the average Whoop user whose sleep quality or whose recovery was diminished by 13%. So I guess apparently some of the Whoop users might be having more than 1 glass, and they might be having it later in the evening. So that was kind of a wake-up call to maybe decrease even more than that.
Right, if you want to sleep. And we did an episode earlier on the rise in alcohol and drug abuse among this older population, and it is significant. So it's kind of, they're using alcohol to cope with the the sadness, the grief, and the stress of divorce, but then it is contributing to not being able to sleep, which then contributes to, as you mentioned, the lack of being able to think logically and rationally and receive that rest of the brain or rejuvenation of the brain. So it's like you're on a hamster wheel.
Yes.
It's so we got to be careful with that. And then
Absolutely.
I know there's so much to sleep. Yeah, who thought sleep could have so many different levels
I
of
know.
complexity?
It is very complex, and I think we're actually just scratching the surface. I think there's a
Yeah.
lot more we're going to be learning in the next 10 years about it. So
Right.
let's
I'm
get
sure.
excited.
Right. Well, I think the exciting thing is that there are things that you can do.
Yes,
There are
definitely.
strategies, and there are people like you who have made a specialty and a practice of helping people sleep.
Yeah. I
That's-
think there are going to be more and more people entering the sleep coaching world, and I'm really happy about that because we do not have enough sleep doctors to currently service all of the people who have insomnia. So more sleep coaches are needed for sure.
And because not everybody is going to, if they go and get a breathing study and they get a CPAP, the continued usage of CPAP machines is pretty low.
Yeah.
A lot of
the
people,
compliance.
they don't stick with it for a long time, and so
Yeah.
then they need other strategies to help them. And I see that's where a coach like you can come into play as
Yes.
well and have a huge impact.
Yeah.
So that's important. So I wanted to ask you, one of the things that I do when I have those 3 a.m. wake-ups, I only give myself so much time, and then I think, I'm just going to get up. And sometimes I'll put on a podcast, and I'll listen to a podcast, and then I find myself drifting off to sleep because it takes my mind off of all the crazy worries that I have that woke me up.
Yeah.
What is your recommendation for how long we should struggle before we just get up?
Yeah, so in the CBTI technique that I mentioned before, most of the kind of, I would call them more old school practitioners, the people, the guys, they were actually mostly guys who kind of invented this in the mid 80s. The grandfathers will say, after 20 minutes,
Okay.
go do something. But some of the newer people in sleep beg to differ on that one. And so I will be so bold as to defy my elders here. But the thing about 20 minutes is that, like, you're not supposed to actually look at the clock.
Oh.
So how do you really want to have a clock outside of your bedroom. You don't want to be focusing on the time as you're sitting there waiting to go to sleep. So the question would be, well, how do you know it's 20 minutes?
Right.
Right? And what is so magical about 20 minutes?
Right.
So a lot of people now are starting to say it doesn't really matter how long you've been awake, but it's really the mental and emotional condition that you're in. So in other words, if you are stressing and tossing and turning and getting exasperated, I think
Right.
that's the word, exacerbated, but by not being able to sleep, then that's actually a great internal cue to get up like you've done and do something to kind of distract yourself until you become sleepy again. So really, I would say it's really what you feel like you need to do, not versus what, like, a specific time that you should, that you hear it needs to be done by.
Okay. But I should stay away from blue light screens. Is that?
Yeah, I would recommend trying to be away from blue light and bright light. However, there are, some exceptions. For example, if you are doing a breath work or a meditation app that's going through your phone, you may need the phone for that. And so you could just wear some blue light blocking glasses to mitigate that. But what we really don't want to see happen is getting on social media and scrolling.
Right. Yes.
And looking at the news, because those things get us activated and get our brain more active. And so we're not going to find ourselves in a very calm and peaceful state to get back to sleep.
Yeah, especially when you're going through divorce. A lot of times people will go through social media, then they start seeing their ex and their ex's friends, and then
Yes.
then they get more triggered, and it just makes it worse. So maybe having some sort of even a radio nearby or something soft sound But what I hear you say is you want to try to calm your mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to ask about if hears our show, they really think they could benefit from working with you. In your experience, how quickly do people start to experience more restorative sleep once they start working with a coach?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the person. I think that it could be anywhere from like a couple weeks to a couple months. A lot of it depends on how quickly they follow along with the techniques and suggestions, and then some of it depends on how long they've had the problem,
Okay.
right? So they may have really, really ingrained habits that are hard to break. So, it really depends on the person. I really wish I could give like, oh, in 3 weeks, everyone's going to be
Right.
great.
Yes.
But it's your mileage may vary accordingly.
I love that. It depends on how long you've been suffering with the condition,
Yeah.
right?
And how open you are to trying new things.
Yeah.
Because some people, I tend to attract clients who are pretty open-minded about trying new things and who are coachable, right? So if you're a coachable person and you're willing to experiment with different interventions, I would say you're going to have a better success rate than someone who's digging their heels in saying, well, I've always done it like this,
Yes. Yeah, change is
Yeah.
hard. Change is hard.
It is.
But
it is. And it helps having somebody like a coach with the accountability piece.
yes.
For sure.
Yeah, that's important. That's great. Because from my perspective, gosh, your whole outlook could change dramatically if you're just able to rest.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, okay. One of the things that I ask everybody now is, what's inspiring you lately?
Oh, gosh. Well, I feel like there's just a lot of new health information that's coming out recently about circadian health, which we kind of touched on, but it's something that I've learned a lot over the past year and that I'm continuing to learn about. And I think that circadian health really hasn't made it mainstream yet. But I'm really, really hopeful that it's going to start to trickle into like mainstream medicine at some point in the near future. Because right now it's, I don't want to say fringe, but it's like not commonly even understood in regular conventional medicine. So that's kind of exciting to see for the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems to me from what I've read, people are starting to take it more seriously.
I think so.
They're not brushing it off anymore as, oh, I just can't sleep, but maybe having a better understanding of the actual impact to all areas of their life if they're not sleeping well. So
Yeah.
I think that's exciting. It isn't, and also it used to be among boomers kind of a badge of honor of, well, I only slept, 6 hours last night and I was up working. And I think that's kind of going away.
It is. I've seen it happen. I'm on LinkedIn pretty actively.
Yeah.
And over the past 3 years that I've been doing this, I've been seeing that kind of attitude fade away.
Yes.
And occasionally I will see somebody post about, sleep is for the weak, or I'll sleep when I'm
Right.
dead. And
Yes.
the person who posts that will often get pounced on
Yes.
for saying that. So I think we are really seeing a shift in how we're looking at sleep as something that's great for us rather than like an inconvenience.
Exactly. And I love that. Just like I love, I'm retired. I retired in 2021 as an executive. And when I see the leaders today that are, probably Gen X leaders and some millennial leaders, and they're more intent about their balance in life and they're more intent about their physical needs. I admire that. It's
Me
like,
too.
yes, it should not be all for the company and that's it.
Yes.
So I think, gosh, I would like to have been a leader in this time now. So
Right. Right.
yeah. So Morgan, is there a person you worked with that really made a lasting impact on you?
Well, I would say my husband.
Ah,
That's how we met. We worked together.
really?
And yeah, we worked at the same firm a while ago. So he's made a very lasting impression on me, obviously. Yeah.
He has a way of doing that. And I have to tell our
Yeah,
listeners,
I know.
I worked with Morgan's husband as well in the ad agency in Virginia. And still to this day, he's a wonderful mentor and friend. And I have a lot of respect for him. So
No, that's sweet.
you have a good one.
I know. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, Morgan, I thank you for joining me today. I want to remind everybody I'm going to put Morgan's free guide on our show notes, and also I'll have it on our Facebook page. But she has it available on her website, which is morganadamswellness.com/awake again. And again, I'll link that so you don't have to search for it. And would you also let our listeners know how they can reach you, your social media information?
Sure. So my social media is Morgan Adams Wellness at Instagram, and then I'm Morgan Adams Wellness on Instagram. I'm sorry, LinkedIn.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure there will be people who listen to this and they'll say, I need that kind of help. And I hope they do. So,
Yeah, feel free to DM me. I love talking about sleep, so don't be a stranger.
right, good to know. Okay, well, Morgan, thank you so much. It has been a pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah, I'm very excited. So, for our listeners, please join us on the next episode, and I welcome your feedback. Please leave a comment, or you can email me at silverdivorcepodcast@gmail.com, and join our Facebook and Instagram pages at Silver Divorce Podcast. I also ask, please leave us a rating and a review. That does help to grow the podcast and attract great guests like Morgan. This podcast is brought to you by our title sponsor, the Center for Sports Medicine and Orthopedics, and show sponsor, Medicare Misty, and I thank them greatly for making this possible. The Center for Sports Medicine and Orthopedics is the area's leading provider of multi-specialty orthopedic care. Using innovative surgical techniques and technologies, our team of specialists deliver exceptional results backed by exceptional patient care. Learn more at sportmed.com. Medicare Misty is a real person who can help answer your Medicare questions. Get real help from her team at medicaremisty.com. Whether you are considering divorce or are newly in the divorce process, we'll help you on your journey and tell you things your attorney might not tell you. Until next time, remember, divorce is one event. It does not define who you are. I'm Lisa, and I'll see you next time.